By every rule the story sets up, Naruto should be the villain. Worse childhood than Sasuke, worse isolation than Gaara, same monster sealed inside him as both, and somehow he's the one grinning at the end, not the one burying a village. That's not a plot hole. That's the entire point, and almost nobody talks about it because trauma makes villains is such a satisfying sentence that people forget to check if it's actually true. I used to argue about this online constantly. Does suffering create villains or something else? People treat it like settled science. Pain hardens you into whatever the world made you. Very quotable, also incomplete. Because pain shapes people, just not all of them the same way. And nothing shows that fracture better than three kids carrying almost the same wound, ending up on three completely different roads. Gaara, Sasuke, Naruto. Same wound, three roads. Let's find out where they actually split. The popular version of trauma makes villains treats it like a law of physics. Hurt people, no stops in between. But suffering isn't a chemical reaction with one guaranteed output. It's a fork in the road. And what determines the direction is almost never the pain itself. It's what happens around it. Who shows up? And what story the person starts telling themselves about what the pain means. Start with Gaara. Feared before he's done anything wrong. His own father signs off on assassination attempts against him. The one person who might have loved him without an agenda gets murdered specifically to weaponize his grief. So Gaara adapts the only way that made sense to a kid raised with zero safety. If love isn't real, power is the only currency. He builds his identity around dominance, not villainy, just the only instructions anyone ever gave him. Model 1. Isolation plus zero intervention equals a dominance-based identity. Sasuke complicates things by having an actual support system and torching it anyway. He had a family, a clan, a brother he idolized. Then in one night, that entire structure is murdered in front of him by the person he trusted most, reasons withheld for years. He builds his remaining personality around one thought. Get strong enough to kill the person who did this. Every offer of belonging afterward gets filtered through that mission and found wanting. Sasuke had community, the exact bond that's supposed to keep you from spiraling. And it didn't fully work because the story he told himself was so complete, it overrode the people standing right in front of him. Model 2. A coherent revenge narrative can override even a functioning support system. Then Naruto, who by every metric should be the most obvious villain of the three, and instead spends the whole show being aggressively hopeful. His isolation isn't one night, it's constant low grade starting before he's old enough to understand it. Same seal power as Gaara, same village fear. By the logic of the first two cases, he should be the clearest villain origin of the bunch. Instead, he's incapable of writing off even the people who've hurt him most. So why does the worst version of that trauma produce the opposite result? The show hands us the answer. Naruto gets exactly one adult for exactly one afternoon, who offers him a different story about what his pain means. Iruka doesn't erase the loneliness. He tells Naruto the isolation isn't proof something's wrong with him. It's proof other people are afraid of something they don't understand, and fear isn't the same thing as truth. One person, one moment, one competing narrative planted early enough to actually take root. There's an old Buddhist parable that names this exactly, the second arrow. The Buddha taught that being struck by misfortune is the first arrow, unavoidable, not our choice. But the suffering we add on top, the story we tell about what that pain means about us, is the second arrow. That one's optional, and it's the one that actually determines the wound's shape. Same first arrow for Gaara and Naruto. Wildly different second arrows, because only one of them got handed an alternative before the wound calcified. This is also where Krishnamurti's idea of conditioning earns its seat. He argued, you are not separate from your conditioning until you observe it happening. Gaara never gets the chance to observe his. Nobody interrupts the loop, so the village's fear simply becomes his self-definition, uncontested. Naruto gets interrupted early enough that his sense of self never fully fuses with the story others project onto him. He stays open, closer to what Buddhism calls anatta, no fixed defended self, while Gaara spends years building a self specifically to never be hurt again, which is armor, not identity. Picture a kid, call him Wen, who grows up in a village that quietly avoids him. No mobs, just doors closing a little faster. For a while, he tries to become undeniable. It doesn't work. It just makes people resent him more. This is the fork. If nobody intervenes, Wen builds an internal case that connection was never on the table and optimizes for capability instead of belonging. Not a moral failing, just the only conclusion a decade of consistent evidence supported. If one person intervenes once, the way they're treating you isn't a verdict on who you are. It's a reflection of what they're afraid of. Nothing about his loneliness changes tomorrow, but he now has a second story to file the old evidence under. He doesn't stop hurting, he just stops concluding the hurt proves he's unworthy of connection. Gaara does eventually get his own version of that intervention. Later, harder one, once the armor is already load-bearing, and he changes anyway, slowly. Which tells you the door doesn't fully close even when the wrong stories had years to set. It just gets heavier to open. People don't become villains because they suffered. They become villains when suffering is the only story anyone bothers to offer them about who they are. Naruto's greatest power was never the Nine Tails. It was that somebody handed him a second arrow's worth of a different story, early enough for it to compete with the first, and he chose it over and over for years. So, who was your Iruka? And is there someone at Wen's Fork right now, waiting on the 5 minutes only you happen to be positioned to give them?